Hey, it's Marvin McKenzie. Just thought I'd spend a couple of minutes with this. I had an opportunity the last couple of days, or last week, I guess it was, to spend a couple of days over on the other side of Washington State, on the eastern side of the state, um, with my parents, and then on Saturday drove back home. And it was an amazing day for me. The drive was incredible. I live over on the near Tacoma, but the drive was incredible because we woke up on Saturday morning and the smoke from all of the fires that are happening in Washington State. The smoke was everywhere. Woke up and could smell it, even though we were hours and hours. It would take hours to drive to where the nearest fire was, and yet smoke was incredible. Fires. I was in Kennewick, Washington. There were fires much to the north of us in Omak and Okanagan, around Republic and Nespelem and all that. There were fires south of us in Oregon, and of course there were fires to the east of us, southeast of us, around Mount Adams in Washington State. We woke up with that smoke and that haze, and the smell of the smoke. About noon, 1 o'clock, something like that, we began our drive home. And as I drove along the highway between Tri Cities and Yakima, the smoke got worse and worse and worse. Yakima was terrible. I'm not sure I could smell it anymore. My nose was so affected that I'm not sure I could smell the smoke in Yakima, but you couldn't see outside at all, and my lungs were beginning to burn. And in my mind, I'm thinking to myself as we're driving, I'm thinking by the time I get to Snoqualmie Pass, probably will be up high enough, and the mountains would stop the smoke. And by the time we got over to the western side of the state, then there wouldn't be any more of that smoke anymore. And to my shock and surprise, that was not what happened at all. I made it all the way to home, and it was hazy and smoke and air filled with smoke even at home. So that the next morning, when I got up Sunday morning, I got up. I'm a preacher. I'm a pastor at Bible Baptist Church in Puyallup, Washington, and I got up to get ready for church, and my lungs were burning, and I had a lot of trouble breathing throughout the day. Sunday, Monday morning, I woke up, and by Monday morning, the smoke was clearing up, but I still had some of that congestion and some difficulty breathing throughout the day. But the thing that interested me as I was driving, I've lived in Washington State. I'm 57 years old. I've lived in Washington State more than 40 years. I was born here in the state of Washington, right here at Tacoma. I live just outside of the city of Tacoma, right here at Tacoma General. I was born here. I spent a few years out of the state going to college, and then I pastored a church in Astoria, Oregon, for 13 and a half years. But I always joke around, when I lived in Astoria, I lived in downtown, lived up on what they call the north slope, or the north hill of Astoria. So I could look over where I lived. I could look over across the town of Astoria, across the river, and Washington was right outside my living room. And so Washington's always been a part of my life. Again, as I said, with the exception of a few years that I spent in college, and 2 years that I spent teaching at a college, one year in California, and then another year in Oklahoma City. But the Washington State has always been where I've lived. And because of the way that I live, my stepfather was a professional rodeo cowboy, so we traveled all the time. And as I said, I was born in Tacoma. I've seen almost every section of the state of Washington. Lived in a lot of them because of my dad's traveling and so forth. We moved quite a bit, and mostly lived on the eastern side of the state. I was born here in Tacoma, but shortly after I was born, my parents moved to the Tri-Cities area, and over around Kennewick, and a little town called Findlay, where I lived until I started school. I went to my first few years of school in Findlay. We moved to Benton City. I went to school in Benton City for a few years. Then we moved to Othello and lived there for a little while. Moved to West Richland, Washington, lived there for some time. We moved from there to Waitsburg, Washington, which is just 20 miles north of Walla Walla. So I spent that time around Walla Walla. While I was in high school, I worked in the wheat fields and worked for a custom harvester. So we did a lot of traveling around the Southeast Washington area, Starbuck and Colfax, and different areas like that where we did where we harvested wheat, cut wheat fields. I lived for a little while in Spokane, not long, but for a little while in Spokane. Traveled all of the route of Highway 2 and covered all of Highway 2. I've taken Highway 20 across from Anacortes, all the way from Anacortes to Omak and Okanagan, over in that area, Brewster and that area. Been over in all of that country. I've preached a revival meeting up in Republic. I've spoken at different church meetings in Tonasket. I've spoken in Usk and Cusick and even in all of those places, Newport, Washington, and throughout the state of Washington, been throughout the state. You know, one time I made a trip. Growing up, of course, Washington, everybody thinks this, I think, as a kid, you know, that someplace else has to be better than the place that they're from. And I can remember as a kid thinking that wouldn't California be great, or wouldn't Florida be great, or wouldn't, you know, whatever area it is. Now as a preacher, I've been able to travel around the country, but I've come to a place where I love Washington State. I love what's here. I love the diversity of the state. I love the diversity of the scenery. There's the Palouse Falls and around the dams. Just lost the name of the Grand Coulee Dam, the Coulees up in that area. Just love the state of Washington and all that's here, and appreciate the state. Not positive that I agree with the politics of the state of Washington on all of the time, but I do appreciate the state. I appreciate the beauty of the state. Traveled into Canada and also down into Mexico. And as I've gone through Canada, went to Canada, went up to see Lake Louise and Banff and Calgary and those areas. And as I drove back into Washington State from that trip, you know, I thought to myself, there is enough in this state to keep a guy to see and to take in, to make a guy happy for the rest of his life. And I just love this state of Washington. I just was curious who else is from the state of Washington and who lives here and who's been here and who's enjoyed the state of Washington as much as I have. And looking for people who have that interest in our state, not just our politics, but in our culture. There is a unique culture, I think, that's part of Washington State. Years ago, I theorized, and that is just a theory, I know, but I theorized that Oregon and Washington together have a unique kind of culture that is, to a large extent, built by that pioneering spirit of these folks who left St. Louis and that east, and they took those covered wagons and brought their families out here at great sacrifice to themselves and to their families, and came out here to start new lives and to build farms and towns and communities and stores and industries. And there is a unique kind of culture that's out here. It is a culture that I think, in many respects, avoids spirituality, Christianity, and avoids worship. There is a kind of an independence that happens in Washingtonians and Oregonians too. But in Washingtonians, there is an independence, a sense of I can do it on my own. I can do it without God. I don't need others. There is that kind of an attitude that is very often characteristic of we who are from Washington. But that isn't to say that Washington is without God or without a strong influence now, and even a church history, a strong church history. And so there is incredible diversity in thought and history, and I'm just interested in seeing who might be interested in those same kind of subjects here and be able to speak about those kind of things. Well, at this time, I think I'm going to go ahead and sign out. We'll catch you again at another time.